thank you everybody for joining us, and thanks Irene for
Thanks for
joining.
coming. Thank you all for coming too. I'm glad I'm not speaking to an empty room.
No, so we have an audience here, and we have an audience online that is in the Deer Creek office. And the format today, we'll have a 30-minute kind of a fireside chat. So I'll ask some questions that people sent earlier, and you're welcome afterwards, 15 more minutes to ask some free questions that came out or you're interested in. So it's a fireside chat, so it's unstructured. Feel free to jump in whenever you want. So first of all, for those of you who didn't read the brief, Irene Au is a design leader with a rich track record of accomplishments. She built and headed user experience at Yahoo, Google, and Udacity. Currently, she's a design partner at Khosla Ventures, where she works with early, mid, and late-stage startups and CEOs. So it's a real privilege to have her here. So thank you very much. Just a few questions that came across that sent out the invite. Let's start from the first one. If you could jump back in time to two challenging points in your career where you felt you were able to make a significant impact despite the obstacles from the design perspective, what would they be? And what were the key learnings that you took from them?
So I would say the first big challenge, I think, was just establishing human-centered design at Yahoo. So when I joined Yahoo, it was in 1998. They had started out as a hand-curated directory of websites, and we had about 500 employees, and there were a few designers, but really they were like HTML people, you know. And I joined during a time when they were just starting to transition from being a hand-curated directory of websites to offering more interactive web products and services. So they had just launched My Yahoo. They had just bought 411, which created Rocket Mail, which eventually became Yahoo Mail. And so the leadership team recognized that they wanted to have somebody with my background to come in and help them figure out a way to systematically build experiences and products that were easy to use, easy to understand, easy to learn. And so they recruited me. I was only 2 years out of graduate school, so I began my career at Netscape, which was really good training ground because the team was fabulous, and I still credit many of the mentors I had at that time with many of the things I carry with me today. But when I joined Yahoo, as much as I had support from my boss and his boss, there wasn't a lot of understanding around what human-centered design was. So 1998, like the internet was just, this was like in its baby years, and nobody was doing like user research. Nobody really knew what human-computer interaction was, or engineering psychology, or things like that. And so my role was to create this practice where it had never been done before, and moreover, I was kind of barely out of school doing it as well. So that was definitely one of the biggest challenges of my career. And the other thing too was like, people were kind of wondering like, how are you useful? Because there were already people who were making mock-ups for the product managers who were back then called producers. And the producers were the ones who were coming up with kind of like the user experience, like the interaction design, but had a very limited, had limited visibility into how people were actually using their products or what they needed or how they were behaving. So there was really no incentive or motivation to work with me because they felt like I would just slow them down, or they didn't really understand what value I had to offer. So I think one of the key insights I had was I had to figure out like what would be my Trojan horse, so to speak. Like what value could I offer to these people that would make them even more awesome than they already were. And I found that the key there really was in the user research, because nobody had ever watched their users use products before. And so I built a makeshift usability lab where we literally took two conference rooms side by side and put a video camera and a computer in one room, and then put a TV screen in the other, and we piped over the video feed. We ran the cable over the wall through the ceiling, because we were still on like, you know, at home you might be on like 4800 baud modem or something. This was before wireless or, you know, anything like that. But it was like just the ability to be able to see people use their products. There was like this voyeuristic element to the experience that the producers like loved it. And once we could start to watch people using our products, then as a designer, I could come back and make suggestions for how to make the product better. And so that created a virtuous cycle where then more and more people wanted to work with me, they wanted to engage, because they saw that this kind of work was really valuable. And from there so I started as like the one person, and I eventually built up the human-centered design practice. I eventually, the other people who were like the HTML folks, they reported up through me, and by the time I left Yahoo 8 years later, the team was about 350 or 250 or so. So a mix of visual designers, interaction designers, user researchers, and web developers. So I mean, this was pretty remarkable because like nobody really understood what UX was. It wasn't even called UX. Originally the team was called GUI, G-O-O-E-Y. And that was like a riff off of GUI, graphical user interface. And I really hated that term. So I made a proposal to the chief product officer back then, like, can we rebrand the team to be called the user experience team? And he was like, well, he's really reluctant because he's like, well, it's everybody's job to think about the user experience, but I'll approve it if you call yourselves user experience and design. So we called ourselves the UED group. But this was really fun. We were inventing this whole profession and this whole field and how it would be structured inside companies and what the job description would look like and what the expectations are for the role and things like that. And I think it really endures because as I see UX teams across the industry, like a lot of it is modeled after what we created at Yahoo. So that was really cool. And then the second big challenge was later I would go on to Google in 2006, and the company was much bigger than when I joined at Yahoo at 500 people. Google had tens of, maybe like 11,000 people or something. And there was already a pretty robust UI team, that's what they called them. And there were like 60 UI designers, most of them just straight out of school with degrees in computer science or human-computer interaction. And the main reason for that is because Larry Page required all designers at Google to have computer science degrees, or at least know how to code at that time. So we had about 60 people like that, and then about 40 people who were like, they were called usability analysts. And the 60 designers plus the manager of the usability analysts, they all reported flat into me. There was no structure. So I had 61 direct reports when I joined Google in 2006. And so there were the classic problems around people feeling like they were not involved early and up front. They didn't have enough influence over the concept of what was getting made. Like the engineers would come up with prototypes and then come to the design team and say, hey, can you make this look a little bit better? The usability analysts just felt like they were just kind of servicing ticket requests for running usability studies. And in contrast to my experience at Yahoo 8 years earlier, like there was an abundance of usability studies at Google. So my Trojan horse that I had at Yahoo didn't necessarily apply at Google. So I had to figure out, once again, kind of starting from scratch, like how do I elevate the strategic importance of design at Google under these kinds of conditions. Like I couldn't hire anybody with visual design backgrounds. They had to know how to code, so that kind of narrowed the field of people that I could hire. There were preconceived expectations around what these people would do and how they did their jobs, and then the usability team was really like design QA. They weren't really integrated early and up front with the designers. They weren't working like this with the designers. It was more like this and this. There was a lot of friction because some people liked the way it was, but they were also very unhappy with not having kind of the influence that they had hoped. And when I look back at what the state of design looked like in 2006 at Google, and I look at what there is now, it's a complete transformation. And so of course, we did things like rebranded to UX, and now the whole industry uses the term UX. We have designers and researchers working hand in hand. And obviously, Google now has designers who they have like real design degrees, and there's like an elevated aesthetic quality to the Google experience. So I'd like to think that I laid the groundwork for that to happen, and a lot of that was through building relationships, building trust, meeting people where they're at, and then building off of that. And so I would say those are some of the key takeaways as I reflect on those challenges that I faced at Yahoo and Google was trying to figure out, like, when in a situation where people don't necessarily need to work with you or want to work with you, or understand what you do, how do you position yourself to be the person everybody wants to work with? And how do you create that added value so that people see the importance and want to invest in you? And a lot of that really is through high EQ, soft skills. It's building trust, building relationships, kind of empathizing with what the other side is kind of going through and what they need, and then figuring out how can I don't want to say hack the system, but in some cases I had to hack the system. How can I make the situation work for everybody? So yeah.
I think that's an amazing lesson learned. And I think that, the times have changed and the maturity of companies has changed, but I think that the basic elements have remained the same. You still have to find the ways to penetrate or ways to convince, what's in it for them when you want to move things in an organization. Even though I think that the challenges that you faced at the time are significantly bigger since the maturity level was so low for understanding what is design in the first place.
But for any industry or profession, it's like you start with where you're at and you're just constantly trying to figure out how do I take it further from here, so wherever it is.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And looking to where do you see the importance and the impact of design as we look to the future? Because we talked about the past of where design was and how it evolved to such a significant place. Today, I think people take it for granted that we need a UX, we need a design. But when you look to the future, what would you say would be the next trend in UX design?
Yeah. So any innovation in design in any kind of industry, whether it's architecture or fashion design or physical product design or software design, any kind of innovation is really empowered, it's enabled by the innovations in the technology or the context in which you're designing. So like in architecture, it's like when concrete became a more sustainable material to build with, or glass or steel, that completely changed the way buildings were designed. Or like fashion, it's like as soon as we had materials like polyester, that kind of opened up doors. Physical product design, that's like plastic. With software design, it's like the internet and then mobile phones, and then where do we go from here? And so I think like the core question here that we're talking about when we look at the future of UX design is like, where is the technology going? So it's really interesting to think about that, because like working inside a venture capital firm, we're on the forefront of that. And so, of course, everything is influenced by AI and machine learning now. And so there's so many UX challenges that kind of relate to that. So ranging from the fact that more decision making or the lower level work may be taken care of by AI, so that changes the role of the human users or operators. And so their relationship with whatever it is they're using is evolving. So how do we think about that? Maybe things become more invisible, but how do you help people make better informed decisions or give them a sense of control? There's also the issue around unintended consequences. Like the technology is evolving and moving a lot faster than we can wrap our heads around. And so I think designers have potentially a huge role in helping the world understand what are the implications of that, and how do we make that tangible for people so that people can understand and see where all of that is going. It's also like, I think software and AI is becoming a horizontal rather than a vertical, so it's permeating every aspect of life. So like, we have a number of companies that we've invested in that are applying AI towards like biotech or fintech or things like that. So like this whole idea of using AI to understand how is a particular disease evolving, where is it going, so that the company can create designer drugs to target that particular disease based on its trajectory. And so, like maybe from a UX perspective, like I'm not really sure yet how design will play a role in that, but it's interesting to see that this is becoming a horizontal, and so it means that regardless of what profession you're in, whether you're a doctor, a lawyer, or whatever, banker, that you need to understand this technology. And so design will definitely play a role in that somehow, if not in the aesthetics, then at least in the application of it or how it's used.
I totally agree with that, and I think that we also see the changes that as the layers of, in the past we had one screen, it was very simple, And today, even though we have multiple screens that we interact with, and part of them even don't have a UI to some of them, the expectation, our expectation is that we expect to work less and get more value out of the technology. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that I look at UX today, or design, is that we need to get something that's super simple on the one hand, but the challenges sometimes that we face in connecting all these small dots together are bigger than ever.
Yeah, I always say that designers, their role is to make vision tangible. So to the extent that the medium that we've been using is the screen, we have made vision tangible by mock-ups, for example, there's one company I was working with where they posited, like, what if we just launched a feature every quarter where there was like no UI because it's all automated. And I ran a design sprint at this company where we had figured out a solution where most of the lower level work would be completely automated, and there was really nothing to design. And it was kind of interesting because it meant that it shifted the role of designers from mocking up what would be present on the screens to really kind of visualizing scenarios, like a workflow, which is different than like, oh, here's what you see on the screen.
Right. So actually, we're transitioning from UI designers to storytellers, I think, in this domain.
Yeah.
But when I look, to the audience even, it's not only about design. The ability to tell the story is something that taps today into each practitioner in the whole flow, from the QA engineer, a PM. Everybody needs to see the whole story because it's not only about the end screen anymore. You have a very extensive experience, and you've mentored and grown a lot of leaders in the field. What would be the 3 tips you can give people that are thinking about their career as designers, or people that are thinking about their careers as engineers with a focus on design?
One is, like, it's really important to cultivate the ability to empathize with who you're designing for. And I think there's a lot of buzz right now about empathy building and things like that. And I think it's easy to say, but very hard to do in practice. And I see this firsthand because I work with so many startups who have every excuse in the world to not engage in practices that help them build an empathetic understanding of their users. Ranging from we don't have time, or we don't have resources, or we don't want to appear as if we don't know the answers to our clients or customers. You can't design for other people if you don't really understand what's behind them. Like, what is their motivation? What are their goals? How do they think? Where are they feeling friction? And I think it's really hard to grasp at a visceral level what that experience is like unless you watch them. So a lot of people think that user research, for example, is about asking people what they want, and it's not the case at all. It's not market research. Like, this is really about watching people, and then through watching them, you kind of understand people's latent unmet needs. So that's one. I think everybody should, not just designers, but engineers, product managers, marketers, everybody should get out there and watch people. And then second tip is to cultivate a beginner's mind. And I think this is extremely important so that you always have a fresh perspective anytime you encounter a problem that needs to be solved. We naturally, as we gain experience, take shortcuts, and that experience is really valuable because it can lead us to the right answer faster, but can also hinder us from being very creative. And then I think also as people move into leadership roles, for some people it can be, I think this is a natural feeling to feel like, okay, if I'm the leader in this room, I need to have all the answers, and I can't appear vulnerable by admitting that I don't know something because I'm supposed to be telling everybody, leading everybody else. And so this practice of cultivating a beginner's mind is valuable in so many ways. Helps you with creative thinking, it's humbling, helps you come up with newer and different ideas. It's sort of, there's also value in the practice of being able to say, I don't know, and I would like help, or I would like insight and perspective from other people. In day-to-day life, I think that can be introduced, not just in the workplace, but to the extent that you can put yourself in different contexts or situations that are unfamiliar, maybe take a different route on your way to work, or I was listening to a podcast with one of my former colleagues the other day who was talking about how she took up a new hobby just to kind of have that beginner's mind. In the last year or so, I've started taking dance classes, which I had never done before. But it's so humbling to do something where it's like completely foreign. So that practice kind of builds up the muscles within you to just kind of be like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing here, and I need to learn. And then the third piece of advice, and I had it, and it was on the tip of my tongue, and I'm forgetting. I think self-development really comes from self-awareness and looking inside. And that can be very difficult for people to do these days because we're so connected all the time to our technology. We have every reason to not sit with ourselves. But really, when we make the time to sit with ourselves, it's like dating yourself. We learn so much more about, like, why do you feel this way? Like, what are you feeling, and why do you feel this way about this thing? Helps you get to the root cause of what's holding you back from doing something that needs to be done or whatever. And so I'm very concerned about the constant distraction that we face ourselves with. It's like the continuous partial attention problem. I mean, it's epidemic proportions now that I think is kind of ruining society. And so I would like to just invite people to just always take some time to just sit with yourself and look inside. As a leader, it's like any kind of problem or baggage or fear or insecurity or attachment or whatever that you hold inside, that seeps out to the rest of the organization. It plays out in the team and ultimately affects whatever the team is trying to build. And so if you're trying to be an effective individual contributor or a leader, the best place to start really is to start with yourself, working on yourself.
Awesome. And when I think about design, one of the biggest questions that people say, okay, I want an amazing design, I want a great design. But from your perspective, what makes a good design a great design, in your opinion? If you can share a few examples, because it seems like, constantly people say, I want a great design, but they're constantly wanting to mimic something that already exists there. So
It's interesting. I was just having this conversation with my husband over lunch today, like Slack. Slack was definitely not the first IRC product out there. And before Slack, everybody was using HipChat. And before that, it was just like text-based IRC. Why Slack all of a sudden now? And, we're good friends with Stuart. And it's like, you ask him, how has Slack become so successful? He would say, I have no idea. There's always some luck that's involved there too. But there's a little bit of luck that comes into play. But I would say the difference between good design versus great design is good design, it meets your expectations and it gets the job done. It's useful, it's usable, it's desirable, and it does what you need it to do. And it does it pretty well, pretty reliably, pretty efficiently. A great design is one that makes people feel amazing. I feel so happy when I use blah, or I feel so powerful when I use this, or I feel so efficient when I use this. So I think Google is another example, because Google was certainly not the first search engine out there. I mean, there's so many others before Google. But the difference, I think, with Google is that Larry and Sergey conceived it to be a very powerful, fast, efficient tool. And in turn, when people use Google, they feel powerful, fast, and efficient. And so this is, again, kind of ties back to what I said earlier, where it's whatever baggage or virtues you hold, that will play out in your organization. It also plays out in whatever it is that you make. And I have a whole talk on this that you can see online. I have the transcript posted in Medium. But it is kind of what we make, we put out there, and then whatever we consume, we also become. And so I think ultimately great design, passes on positive virtues to the people who consume that product or experience.
Yeah, as you were speaking, I just had the picture of Amazon, Craigslist, which are good design, but it's not enjoyable. It's it does its job, but I think that it's not something you want to engage with.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a last question is before I open the question to the audience. What are the key metrics for measuring design in big organizations from your experience? You know, what makes a success for the design department?
Yeah. It's interesting to think about this because I've seen so many organizations tackle this in different ways. There are some companies, some cultures that are very evidence-based and very quantitatively based, and they A/B test everything, and you know, everything is a nail that has to be struck with a hammer. And that tends to work to the extent that if you know you have clearly defined success metrics, it can really motivate a team to move forward in that direction. But it can also be at the expense of keeping everything else in balance and looking at the whole. It's like if you move this variable in this direction, maybe something else gets sacrificed that you're not looking at or paying attention to. And so if you're myopically focused on this one metric, you kind of lose sight of the bigger picture or the whole picture. I mean, just as a simple example, it's like, you know, if I wanted to create a page where people are going to click and convert over or, you know, click on this link or this button, I can make that button really huge and red and blinking, and a lot of people might click on it, but maybe customer satisfaction goes down, or maybe what ends up resulting is not meeting my expectations. So that's a very simple, you know, simple example that illustrates my point. And so in cultures where there's kind of an over-reliance on evidence and data and metrics and quantitative, they may lose sight of the qualitative, the feelings that people are left with when they use the product, or you know, like these virtues and principles that I talk about, or even just like they throw some things off of balance because they're so focused on this other thing. And then there are other cultures, like Apple, for example, I think is very faith-based. So there's like an idea, a belief, a point of view, like a worldview, and they're trying to create an experience that upholds those principles and that worldview. And I'm not saying that one is necessarily better than the other, but everything has to be in balance. Like I think the data helps inform, it's a nice lagging indicator. It's like once you put something out there, you get data, you can kind of get feedback and see what's happening. The qualitative tells you the why behind the what. So they go hand in hand. In terms of like measuring like design quality or user experience quality or things like that, I have seen some organizations come up with some very interesting ways to measure that, even in qualitative ways. So like at Yahoo for a while we tried to, like, this was in the day and age when, so after the dot-com crash in like 2001, the company was really just trying to keep the lights on because, you know, like other competitors like Lycos and Excite had all gone away. Like I speak at Stanford sometimes and I talk about Excite and people like just blank stares. They've never heard of Excite. So at that time, Yahoo was trying to do everything it could to keep the lights on, and we would come, like the ad team would come up with like ad units, like the monster ad that would appear after you send a message in Yahoo Mail. You would get a message confirmation page with a giant monster ad because the sales team was just trying to create ad units that they could sell so that we could stay in business. And so at some point, the leadership kind of lost the gut feeling around, is this a good user experience or not? And so they wanted us to develop like a clutter metric, some way of determining numerically, is this experience cluttered or not? Or to what extent do the ads compromise the quality of the user experience? So we developed like a method to do that just based on like users' perception of the experience. My former colleagues at some other companies have taken this a step further, where they call it the DA metric, and DA stands for desirability, usability, and happiness. And so every single feature before it launches has to go through many rounds of user testing, and they have the users kind of rate the experience or the feature under development, like how much do you want to use this? There are some ways to benchmark usability, you know, based on time on task and error rate and things like that, and then ultimately how happy do they feel? And like if the responses don't meet a certain threshold, the feature doesn't go out. It's not allowed to launch. So like I have seen companies try to quantify the qualitative, and to the extent like if in this particular culture they're very evidence-based. So if that's what it takes to get that idea embraced, then so be it.
It's interesting, I never thought about it, but sometimes over measuring things can really hold back innovation.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, and I definitely saw that too. Like, we were going through a redesign of the Yahoo homepage, and the leadership wanted to A/B test every single thing. Like, should we use blue versus green? Should we use radio buttons versus a drop-down menu? And the resulting design was like a Frankenstein of successful A/B tests. And this is what I mean about losing sight of the whole. Like, it doesn't always work that way. And the other problem with A/B testing excessively is that you can get a local maximum, but it doesn't lead to breakthrough innovation, like conceptually new and interesting ideas. So I think it's really important for people to be aware of the pitfalls.
Yeah, and you mentioned Apple, and I remember a good example when the iPhone came out, and I think that someone from Microsoft leadership said about the phone that no one's going to use a phone without a keyboard. That's crap.
Steve Ballmer said that, yeah.
And eventually, everybody's using it today. So sometimes I think it's probably right. The life is probably in the balance between the two.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I have some more questions, but maybe the audience has some questions they want to raise out.
Hi, Ari. My name is Namrata. Thank you for the insights. I'm a product manager here, and my question is, how do you use design as a differentiator? Now, simplicity, efficiency, all of that, it's almost become table stakes now. And while you will deliver all of those to your users, how do you dazzle them? How do you think about including something that elicits pleasure on top of getting the work done?
Yeah, and I think that happens at many different levels. So I'll start at the lowest level, or the most tactical level. It's like the execution of the product. Like, is it? It's one thing for it to be to work, but is it fast? Like with Spotify, Daniel Ek recognized that this had to be super performant. Like as soon as you hit play, the song has to play. And so they invested a ton of resources into making sure that when you press play, the song plays right away. Same thing at Google. They invested millions of dollars into infrastructure that would make web search really fast. So there's the speed. There's also the execution of the experience or the interface. Like, are the details right? Because when people perceive that a lot of care and attention has been paid to the creation of the product, they feel like someone sees them, someone out there is looking out for them, they care about them. There's also a level up, which is unexpected recognition. When you go through some kind of flow or experience and there's a bonus. It's sort of like, let me think of an example. It's like when you stay at the Four Seasons in Punta Mita, for example, you're going to be hanging out at the pool, and around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, there's free ice cream. And they just toss out the free ice cream. And then it's like, oh, that is a great experience. As opposed to going to the Ritz-Carlton in Punta Mita, where you would be nickeled and dimed and have to pay for the ice cream. So this is what I mean. It's like the unexpected delights and treasures that make people feel like, oh, somebody really cares about me. I wasn't expecting that, but I got it. So this is true not only in, I've seen some experiences where it's kind of whimsical, they keep it lighthearted and entertaining and fun. Maybe it's through animations, maybe it's through the language of the copy. And then other times it's through some kind of feature or functionality or offering that it's like, wow, I wasn't expecting this, but it just worked. So I'm trying to think of some examples here. This may not be the best example. This is the first one that comes to mind. Is in Slack, when you sign in on another device, there has to be a handshake that takes place. And usually, with other companies, they might say, okay, you need to click on this link, go check your email, enter in the code into this thing, and so there's this whole handshake that has to happen, but you have to click 10 times to make that take place. And I think Slack is you can go through this verification process, or you tap on this button and we'll just send you the magic link and it works. And so they kind of cut down the number of steps and the effort. And it was what was amazing about that was not only how efficient and easy it was, but the fact that they recognized that this was broken, and they tried to offer something that would be even better than that. So, so I think like this delight can happen at so many different levels, like visually and aesthetically, as well as experientially.
Just to piggyback on that, when you mentioned Slack, I remembered Waze as an example. When Waze is a navigation app. It's a simple app, but when I start my drive, I just say Siri, open Waze, and it opens. It automatically knows that this time I'm going to go home. It automatically opens and offers me my home address. It's effortless. And to piggyback on what Irene said, it's the end result is the UI, it's the design, but all the stakeholders along the process, from the PM to the engineer, have an impact on how eventually you get to the design, right? Because it's about understanding the users, what's the value, it's understanding, making sure that the performance and the story and everything that we're telling is nice, and as well as making it very beautiful and very easy to consume. So I think there's no one silver bullet. It's about the whole that, it's like the Gestalt effect. It's the sum of all the parts together that make it amazing, or make it bad. Okay. Any other questions? Yes.
Hi, I'm Angela. Thank you so much for coming in, Irene. Really looking forward to this talk. So my question is, Rubrik is a very enterprise-facing company, and where do you see the role of design in enterprise versus consumer companies? Because with enterprise companies, you might be selling like a product with many features, and then that's what they're buying at the end of the day. And the design is just used by the end users at the end of the day. So where do you see, how can we make a difference with design in this case, and having to differentiate us?
So the question was how, in an enterprise company versus a consumer company, is the contribution of the roles and responsibilities of design different? The ways in which design can contribute to a company different? And I would say they're the same. Like I said, design is about making vision tangible. And that is true whether your audience is consumers or enterprise. I actually really enjoy working in an enterprise context because you know who your users are and they have real problems that need to be solved. You're not just inventing something that appeals to one of the 7 deadly sins, gluttony, laziness, whatever. So I think there are a couple of ways. I mean, one is in helping the whole organization understand the context of use. So hopefully, you can bring that to life for the rest of the organization, so that everybody has a common mind around what the end user is going through, what their motivations are, what their needs are, what's the context of use. And then in terms of conceiving different possible solutions, that's another aspect, ranging from the actual user interface to the whole story. Maybe it's an opportunity to completely change the notion of what it means to do this kind of work. So I worked with one enterprise company where the PM was like, well, we need to create a feature that sends reports when new machine clusters need to be ordered. And so the PM had spec'd it all out and had hoped that the designers would create the mock-ups for this reporting user interface and that the engineers would go build it. And the engineers and the designers, when they got together, they were like, look, this is stupid low-level work that the end user doesn't want. They don't want more email reports saying, go buy new machine clusters, and they completely turned the problem upside down and reframed it in terms of what's motivating the user and what's going to make them feel awesome, and then just totally change the paradigm. So it was really transformative. And I think this kind of work can happen in an enterprise or a consumer context or setting.
Just like that today, in today's era, the notion of, okay, it's consumer, it needs to be nice, beautiful, easy to use, and that's enterprise, someone got paid for that, it can be crappy, bad, whatever, is changing because, the price of migrating between solutions in today's age is so simple, and people also expect it to be. So I think that, from my perspective here, our biggest challenge at Rubrik is creating consumer-grade user experience from an ease of use and from a look and feel. One of the challenges that we set up and that we're working right now in that will roll out hopefully by the end of the year or a bit later, is to have a look and feel that feels consumer grade and a user experience that feels consumer grade. Assuming that our assumption should be, it's like these shoes. We should assume that our user can choose to go buy shoes on a Nordstrom Rack or on Zappos or whatever. That should be our basic assumption when we develop our products. And that will, the end result will be a good product that people will prefer buying as opposed to the competition.
Yeah, that was an explicit strategy that we had for Google Apps, was that we recognized that people were demanding the same level of quality in the design and user experience in the tools that you used at work as they were using at home. And so the Google Apps team was like, let's spoil users at home so they demand the same tools at work. Like, they don't want to live in Microsoft products anymore. So that was, because everybody's expectations are elevated now.
Any further questions?
I just have, going with that, hi, my name's Travis, thanks for coming in. On the consumer to enterprise, it seems to be bleeding more into the enterprise of the last even 4 years. And a lot of demand from our clients for that. Have you seen any particular trends that on the qualitative side that people are asking for in the enterprise context?
That users would be asking for?
Yeah, any particular trends that you're seeing kind of last 2 to 3 years that are specific to the kind of the qualitative, the happiness, makes them feel awesome?
I think that goes back to how people's expectations are just heightened because everybody's internet native now and device native, so they're not going to put up with some crappy looking Oracle 1990s looking interface. And I think increasingly people expect things to work much more quickly, so there's less latency, everything's more responsive. Maybe even where there's a lot of data that maybe with AI or better analytics tools, systems will not just present data, but actually help with sense making and help people make informed decisions. So that's definitely one thing that I see as a trend.
Don't forget that, today people are more aware of the price tag. In the enterprise, you have to take yourself as an example. If you're using a certain software, it takes you, 1 hour to use it when you do a certain task. And another software can offer the same thing that you can do in half an hour. Then the company would prefer buying that, right? Because your hour is worth a lot of money.
Yep.
So that's another motivator of a lot of companies to compete in this space. And even look at us, Rubrik. Why do people choose Rubrik as opposed to other competitors in the market? Because we do it faster, we do it more efficiently. Simplicity, Rubrik is known for its simplicity. That's why, Rubrik has grown so exponentially. And, I think that our biggest challenge is to be able, as we grow and expand more and more features, to maintain that secret sauce of simplicity despite the growth. And that, exactly. Before we start losing customers for, and Google's a great example. Google didn't lose that simplicity in the search. They didn't say, okay, we're successful now, let's add more and more until we become Alta Vista. I didn't want to say out. But they wanted to maintain that simplicity, and they were able to maintain that. So.
Actually, one of our portfolio companies, Nutanix, and your founder, Bipul, came from Nutanix. As I understand it, the insight that Nutanix had was the recognition that with Moore's law asymptoting, the hardware speed was going to get as fast and efficient as possible. But so that it kind of suggested that the bottleneck for administering data centers and things like that was really with the human operators, the human sysadmins. And so that's why Dheeraj, the founder and CEO, wanted to invest heavily in design because he knew that if the design could be done in such a way that the human system administrators could feel fast, powerful, efficient, that they would want to use Nutanix and it would make them feel amazing and look good. So I think that's a direct example of what you're saying.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So our time is up. So thank you very, very much, everybody. And thank you especially, Irene, for joining and giving very, very interesting insights. And I hope maybe in the future we'll host you for another event.
All right, thanks for having me.
Thank you very much.